This is my report from Saigon in the wake of the Tet Offensive of 1968. The fact that I was in Vietnam at all at such a crucial point of the war was sheer chance. I'd reported on the conflict several times previously and was returning because the US had been claiming that great progress was being made in defeating the Viet Cong, and the BBC wanted me to check it out. I arrived in Saigon in January, just before the Lunar New Year festival, which in Vietnamese is called Tet. The custom had arisen during the war of observing a truce during the holiday. For a few days, hostilities would cease and troops on both sides would stand down. Many of my colleagues working for different news networks would also take a break in Hong Kong or Bangkok or somewhere. But since I and my crew had only just arrived, we stayed in Saigon, and there we were when the Viet Cong decided to break the truce and, as they intended, put paid to all those American claims about success. Throughout South Vietnam, towns and cities erupted in violence. And at first, we were the only British TV crew around covering it. Just as in Gaza in recent times, the truce was not a ceasefire, but a bloodbath. In Saigon, which had been largely untouched by the war, we found ourselves filming fierce street fighting. It lasted several days and was the most alarming experience of my entire reporting career. The recent claims of US military success suddenly seemed unconvincing, just as the Viet Cong had hoped they would. The sheer logistics of getting news reports back to London was so different then compared to the instant satellite feeds of today. We had to air freight our cans of film back to London. But Saigon Airport was closed to civilian aircraft. It took hours of sweet talking and several beers before I persuaded an Australian Air Force pilot to carry my film cans to Singapore and deliver them to the BBC office there. My colleague in Singapore later told me how astonished he was when this pilot sauntered into his office and dumped this bulky parcel on his desk with the laconic greetings, "Hi, your Pommy mate in Saigon asked me to bring you this. He says you'll know what to do with it." And of course he did.
Despite the fires still burning furiously down there in Cholon, life is just beginning during the past 24 hours to return to what passes for normal here in Saigon. But the city is still in a state of shock and chaos. There's no doubt that the Viet Cong offensive knocked the government here flat on its back. And although the Americans spent a great deal of time complaining about how inept the Vietnamese officials were, their own performance has been none too brilliant. Yesterday I went to the office of one of their leading agencies where people were running around like chickens with their heads cut off, and overheard the end of a rather revealing conversation that indicated that much-needed equipment was arriving at the docks here, only to be relabeled and shipped back to the United States again. When I asked the official how such a thing could possibly happen, he shrugged hopelessly and said, "It's the computer and the people," he added. Marshal Key, the vice president who's been appointed to head the recovery committee here, has even done better than that computer. He suggested that a first step towards restoring order in the city would be to arm the population. Now, if there's one thing that the city needs, like an earthquake, it's more weapons. There's already far too much shooting here. Marshal Key also promised the people that the Viet Cong would never again be able to enter the capital. A remark that can't have worried the Viet Cong too much because, of course, they're still here. Even according to official police estimates, there are at least 900 of them in the city, mainly over there in Cholon where the fires are still burning. And if the government forces continue to use the methods they're using now to get rid of the infiltrators, there'll soon be no city left. VC sniper fire from this quarter of town was answered with rockets and aerial strafing. In the resulting fire, another 3,000 citizens lose their homes. The number of refugees is rising so fast that it's impossible to keep pace with figures. Official estimates soared from 40 to 100,000 in one afternoon. There has been some decline in civilian casualties because people have learned to leave their homes as soon as the sniping starts. But with so many fires burning and so much indiscriminate shooting, there's still a steady flow of injured into the hospitals. Outside the gates, relatives wait for news. Some have waited for days without knowing for certain that their loved ones are in the hospital at all. They may well be dead. Many who were killed in the fighting could not be identified. Identification is the major problem in ridding the city of the Viet Cong that remain. Everyone is suspect. The VC are said to have obtained every kind of government uniform. One sees the astonishing sight of government troops searching government troops. To add to the confusion, the security forces often look more like the VC irregulars than the people they're checking. This guard is even armed with a captured Chinese AK-47 rifle. Its distinctive curved magazine is one of the normal ways of distinguishing friend from foe. It's little wonder that friendly forces have been shooting at each other. Even in happier times, Americans tend to go heavily armed. Now their trucks are bristling with weapons. Anxious-eyed GIs scan the rooftops for snipers, and the traffic jams grow daily worse and worse. And to add to the congestion, after a week's absence, the garbage trucks have reappeared, one of the few signs that someone is guiding the destiny of the city. And that someone is obviously the army. The dustmen, like so many other things in Saigon, are not yet working. Passengers most anxious to end their stay in Saigon call every few hours for the latest news. And Mrs. Tui, the bookings manageress, has to make the same apology 100 times a day.
Please call us back by 10 o'clock.
She's lived in this troubled city for the past 20 years. She's married to a Vietnamese, and she hasn't been home for a week because of the fighting around her house. Do you think that the Vietnamese regard this as a victory for the Viet Cong?
It is quite difficult to know what Vietnamese people think, but I would guess that they are a little proud that the Viet Cong are bold enough to attack such a big city. But also they took advantage of New Year Day, and they knew that most of the people were out of town to see the relatives in the provinces, and also the army would be relaxing. So, but I would think so.
Do you mean you think that the Vietnamese people in the general would have a bit of an admiration for the way the Viet Cong did things?
This is what I have been hearing from some Vietnamese, as they did when the Viet Cong shelled the church 2 years ago on the 1st November Revolution Day. Everybody seemed to speak about that day with a bit of admiration, yes, that they could shoot so close from the city and were not caught.
How much are the people suffering from the disruption of food supplies and all that kind of thing?
I don't think they are suffering yet, except the refugees, and I don't know anything about this thing. But it will be very soon, because people cannot afford paying so high prices for the food. And I'm afraid that within the next few days they will start suffering really of shortage also.
While most of the shops remain closed, stalls selling bread have suddenly appeared on the streets. One French loaf costs 3 shillings, 3 times what it cost a week ago. A pound of pork costs 20 shillings, and fresh fruit and vegetables are almost unobtainable. After 2 p.m., this city is dead. The curfew has defeated most business operations. All the roads leading to the capital remain closed. Unless something can be done soon to get life back to normal, Saigon will strangle, and that would suit the Viet Cong very nicely. And that would suit the Viet Cong very nicely.
At the beginning of the film, I mentioned what problems we had getting it back to London, but that wasn't the only trouble that we had in those days. In the pre-digital era, of course, you couldn't look at anything that you'd shot, so you really didn't know what was getting home. You didn't know precisely what they were getting. And also they had to be able to put it together. They had to be able to put the sound with the picture. So we had that wonderful bit of kit, which you've probably seen, called a clapperboard. And that had sort of panorama, 22 take 1, and you go clack on it. And when it got home, the film editor would find the particular clack, both on the film and on the tape, and then he could synchronize sound with picture. Okay. That was one of the problems solved. But then the other thing was, of course, the commentary, because I had to write all of the commentary without seeing the film. So we used to take shot lists, and we would make a list of everything that we filmed, like, 72 take 1, street scene with Barra Boys. And that list would go back, together with the commentary, which I had recorded, as we say, wild track it was called. And then it was the job of the editor to synchronize the commentary that you'd written with the pictures using the shot list. What a cumbersome business. Life is a lot easier today.